Good evening. It is 6:30 Central Time, 7:30 Eastern Time. So we will start. Laura, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Good evening. It is okay. My name is Haley Smith. I'm the president of the Northern Ontario Curling Association. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome you to the 2022 Annual General Meeting of the Northern Ontario Curling Association. This year marks the third time we are conducting our AGM using an online meeting platform. I would like our competitions coordinator, Laura Forget, to take a minute to explain how the meeting will proceed. Laura?
Hi, everyone. So just a few housekeeping reminders. Keep your microphone muted unless you've been called upon to speak. Keeping your camera turned off might help some of those people with poor bandwidth and slower internet, and it reduces the distractions for everybody else. The chat will not be regularly monitored. However, there will be moments when the speakers will suggest that you can use that function, and at that time it will be monitored. When it comes time for some motions, and you'll be informed of when those are, a mover or seconder can give the thumbs up, which we'll be able to see. And then we will use polls to move the motions forward. So those will show up on your screen and you'll be able to click on those polls. And if you have a request from the floor, you can raise your hand, which we'll also be able to see. And at that point, as you're called upon, you can turn on your microphone and camera.
Thank you. At this time, I would like to call the meeting to order and request that a moment of silence be observed for those who have passed in the last year. Thank you. As a reminder, only club delegates are permitted to make a motion and to vote on any motion brought forward. Noca board members will not vote unless they are also a club delegate. All reports and statements have been previously circulated to club delegates with the meeting package. This meeting will also be live streamed in an effort to reach Noca's broader curling community, and a portion of the meeting will be in camera following the completion of the agenda in order for club delegates to raise any matters of concern or interest to the Noca board and executive director. At this time, I would like to introduce the Noca board and staff. I've already introduced myself, Haley Smith. I'm board president, and I'm also a Region 1 director. Joan Shepherd is our vice president and Region 4 director. Jim Turner is our secretary treasurer and a director at large. Rebecca Carr is our Region 2 director. Karen Saramaki is our Region 3 director. Abby Deshane is our Region 5 director. Julie Syme is Region 6 director. Trevor Bono is director at large. And Amanda Gates is director at large. Our executive director is Bobby Ray, and our competitions coordinator is Laura Forget. We will also be joined this evening by some guests: Catherine Henderson from Curling Canada, Jennifer Ferris from the Ontario Curling Council, our keynote speaker, Judy Regie, founder of Connected Leaders, and Candace Phillips representing BDO Dunwoody. Laura, could you please ensure a record is kept of the participants of this meeting? We will move on to the constitution of the meeting. Laura, can you please confirm that the notice of meeting was sent to all club delegates at least 21 days prior to the meeting as required by our constitution, and that the meeting is duly constituted?
Yes, a notice of meeting to all voting delegates was circulated on April 29th, at least 21 days prior to the meeting as required by the constitution. Thus, the meeting is duly constituted.
Thank you. Moving on to report on credentials. Laura, can you please provide a report on the number of voting delegates present and confirm that we have quorum?
So 21 of the association's 48 voting delegates registered for the meeting, and a quorum of 5 is required. So we do have quorum.
Thank you. The agenda was circulated prior to the meeting. Are there any requests for additional items to be added to the agenda, including new business? Raise your hand if you have something to add to the agenda. Can you see any hands up, Laura?
No hands.
Okay, thank you. Can a club delegate please make a motion that the agenda be accepted as distributed?
So we have Pamela Morel.
Thank you. And could we have a seconder to that motion, please?
And we have Marie-Louise Grollo.
Thank you. This will be the first poll that you have on your screen to vote on the motion.
So we have 17 in favor. And 3 have abstained. So that's 20. I think we're close. We may be missing somebody.
That motion is carried. I'd now like to turn it over to Catherine Henderson, CEO of Curling Canada, for some opening remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Haley, and bonjour, everybody. C'est un plaisir d'être ici ce soir. A great pleasure to be here this evening. I just have a couple of remarks that I'd like to, first on behalf of the Board of Curling Canada and the staff, I bring you greetings. I also want to thank you for the incredible trust that the Board of the Northern Ontario Curling Association has shown Curling Canada this year in terms of working in partnership with us to better curling. And I also want to thank you, all of you out that support and govern the sport. I know that this has been an incredibly difficult year, and the support that you have shown your member association by participating in research about your needs and wants, your hopes for the future, for many of the programs and services that you've worked with in partnership with us. You've shown a great deal of partnership and a great deal of leadership to us all. And I think collectively, Northern Ontario really shines like a beacon to many other member associations in terms of the way they are doing things, how they are doing things, and the reasons that they're doing things for. So it is very, very much appreciated. I know that there were some pretty significant disappointments this year in Thunder Bay and Timmins and Sudbury for many of you as it relates to our events. And you have our very public promise that we will be working with those 3 areas in order to be able to bring the benefits that events, the benefits that events bring to your areas. So we will be replacing in Sudbury and Timmins some of our events, and we are working very diligently with the tourism people in Thunder Bay. So I do want to know that I expect to see you all and celebrate with you all when we can do many of these things in person. We are certainly emerging out of a very difficult time. I also just wanted to call out the incredible leadership of the Noca board. They have done some really incredible things, I think, this year for the clubs, setting up things in terms of marketing, in terms of data collection, in terms of sort of how we do things, and many of their youth programming under the leadership of Haley Smith, who's been an absolute pleasure to work with and has been very diligent in terms of meeting with us, and Laura, and particularly Bobby. And Bobby has been just such he's just been so excellent, I would say, for you all. And I will say, because he comes to the meetings that I'm at, he really represents Northern Ontario so well as an ambassador. And we understand your issues. We understand what you're looking for from us. And so I just really want to call out some incredible leadership that you have, and congratulate you on getting through a really difficult year and continuing to work with us, because things are really looking on the up for Noca. So thank you very much. Merci.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you for your kind words. It's been a pleasure working with you and the Curling Canada board as well. Now I'd like to call on Jen Ferris to bring some greetings from the Ontario Curling Council.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me this evening. I'd like to bring greetings on behalf of the Ontario Curling Council board and staff. Noca was very well represented on the on the Ontario Curling Council board by Heather Houston, Laura Forget until she got hired as one of our employees, which we're thrilled about, Julie Syme, and just recently, Trevor Bonneau has been elected to our board, so we're looking forward to working with him. We're, just as a reminder, the Ontario Curling Council is a little bit of an umbrella organization. We function as the formal provincial sport organization with two member associations, that being Curl-On and Noca. And I get the distinct pleasure of running all the developmental programs and the province-wide initiatives and getting to work with Curl-On and Noca very, very closely. And I echo what Catherine was saying in that there are some pretty innovative things that are happening in Northern Ontario, and know that you're very, very well represented both on the provincial and multi-sport and national stages. We might be a smaller member association, but we really aren't. And we get a lot done, and there's some pretty amazing things that are happening. We're very excited to look into the future. Never before have the three curling organizations been so aligned, and I hope you got a chance to take a look at our new strategic plan. And if you don't, please go seek it out, because it's pretty exciting stuff. And we're there to work with you and Noca in the coming years to recover from COVID, but also just to make sure curling is strong for generations to come. So thanks so much for having us. And again, thanks. We look forward to the upcoming season.
Thank you very much, Jen. Now we come to the part in the agenda where we are having a keynote speaker, and I'm very excited about this. Judy Rigi is the founder of Connected Leaders. Judy is in the business of leadership learning by elevating what it means to be a leader. Judy helps leaders create clarity, improve connection, build curiosity, and better communicate. I had the pleasure of hearing Judy speak at the recent Curling Canada Symposium, and I'm thrilled that she was able to be with us tonight. It is my very great pleasure to present to you Judy Rigi.
Good evening. In the spirit of National Indigenous Day tomorrow, I want to honor and just acknowledge the fact that I live, work, and play in the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina, the Nakota Nation, and Métis Nation Region 3, and I absolutely am wanting to honor and acknowledge all the people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. So yes, I am coming to you live this evening from Calgary, and I'm thrilled to hopefully have a bit of a conversation with all of you tonight. I did have an opportunity to go to Niagara and speak with others in the curling community. And I will tell you that actually Northern Ontario holds a very special place in my heart, because I spent a good portion of time at a time in my career where there was a significant amount of change happening in the Thunder Bay region. So I spent a lot of time in that beautiful part of our country, working through some significant changes in a business that I was working at a time. And tonight I do want to talk a little bit about change, and I want to talk a little bit about awareness and the role of leaders now, because I feel like we are having a different conversation or a new conversation about change everywhere. And I feel like this is kind of the place and space that I'm connecting with leaders all over the country, both in sport and the corporate sector, as well as in education, talking about what now, what next. Because I think it's really important for all of us, regardless of kind of the space or place we live in, is to start to really appreciate that if we're trying to lean back on our 2019 playbook for leadership, in that pre-pandemic world, I think we're going to be sorely disappointed in the results we get. I think it's not going to work, because we've changed, the world's changed, sports changed, curling's changed, you've changed. And so tonight I thought I would start a little bit talking about this idea of change. And my hope is perhaps that I can kind of invite you to engage whether through the chat or at the end with some questions or some thoughts around, as you look ahead into the next 12 months for you and the role you play within in the curling community, what is different going to look like? Because I do think that we have to bring different thinking and different energy to the current reality and the current problems of today, regardless of where we're going. So I'm going to, for those that saw me in Niagara, I'm going to pull a few themes, but I'm hoping today that I can add a little bit more to that thinking, because I do believe that we've got to start to take a look at where we are in the future through some new lenses. Change is here. It's not going anywhere. It's always been here. I just think the speed at which it's coming at us is actually coming faster and faster than ever before. There's an awful lot of people who are telling us that, maybe we've got to stop talking about how do I just manage this change or just, persist through it, and just realize that we're living in an era that's now being called one of 3D change. By that being that 3 dimensions of change it's perpetual, it's continual, it's pervasive. It's actually not just in one place in our life. COVID's taught us that, things are coming at us in all parts and places in our life at the same time, personally and professionally. And it's exponential. Just when we think we've heard one thing, something new comes along. And so when I think about this idea of 3D change, I think it requires a new mindset and some new skills. And in particular, it actually requires us to start to take a look at ourselves. Where are we? What's our relationship with change? And as I kind of see if I can kind of show my slides here. When I think about this idea of change, I sort of see the world and everybody in it along a continuum, like a bell curve. And there are those of us who, when change shows up, we're there, ready to go. Let me have it. Let me drive the bus. This is exciting. I want to kind of take the reins and drive into something new, different, and start to tinker and innovate and create something better. There are a lot of us that kind of live in the middle. Those folks that will support it happen, they just don't want to go first. So if somebody has a good enough idea and they can help me see it in a way that I go, oh, I think that could work, I'm in. The rest of us will get on board and start to go. There's the others of us that love to hang out and actually press the pause or the stop button and say, whoa, careful. Have we thought about this? Have we thought about this? This feels risky to me. I'm not sure this is really going to work. And part of what we need to do in kind of this sort of 3D change world is start to ask ourselves, where am I? And when I say, where am I, it's also about how can I look at what is happening to me and around me through a lens of awareness that says, what is good? What is possible? And what role do I want to play? And who is it in here that can help me sort of play that role? So rather than us calling out others, it's actually tapping into ourselves and saying, how can I contribute to this sport that I love, the club that I'm a part of, in this community that I want to continue to nurture and build in such a way that it actually energizes me versus depletes me? And I think what we've got to start to do is, for those that have kind of pressed the pause, the stop, or are raising the risk flag, we need to start, rather than resisting them, we need to start getting curious and listening and having the courage to actually call them in and say, what are you seeing that I'm not seeing? How do you see the world? What is it that I can say or do to invite you to join us in this piece and come along at a pace that works for you? The challenge is when we try and start to intellectualize this whole change piece, that's when we start talking at each other. Change is an emotional process. So we have to start to listen and work with each other so that we can start to kind of move through this era and this space that for many of us is traveling so fast. For many of us is like trying to catch our breath. When I think about the last few years, the idea that I'm going to meet somebody on Zoom was not even part of my vocabulary. The fact that I spend so much of my time in my mini little production studio talking to people all over the country and in North America is kind of amazing to me. So the speed at which we're moving is going crazy, crazy, crazy. And to me, this idea of where do we go next is what I'm calling, in a world of 3D change, we need 5-dimensional leadership. And so I've unpacked the 5 dimensions in 5 D words that I think are really important. Because I think as we start to move forward and lead our clubs, ourselves, our families, our communities, your sport, we've got to start to actually look at the lens of where can I have influence and where can I take 100% responsibility for my contribution. I think what I see in times of change is we look way out there and look at who is or isn't doing what I want or need them to do. And what I want to do is this idea of 5D leadership, especially when we're sitting in at a community level, is let's look in. What am I 100% responsible for? What can I control? What is staying the same? And I think it's important for us to anchor ourselves in the traditions and the core part of what we know and realize there's a lot of things that aren't changing. And it's really kind of the periphery that we start to have to want to or need to or being asked to change. And the opportunity for us is to really say, who can I call in for support, for some honest conversation that's clear, that's kind, that's candid? Who's going to give us some energy to navigate through this tough space? And what action are we going to take? Because we don't think our way into a new way of being. We act our way into a new way of being. And as leaders and role models in our community, our behaviors send signals. They're like ripple effects. And if we start to look at our leadership through the lens of being a positive role model and thinking about how do I send positive ripple effects through my community, that it allows people to stay engaged, in fact, actually attract more people into our clubs, and we start to think differently, I think then we create an energy that is attractive and engages more. Because I said before, change is an emotional thing. If I can see it and it feels safe or good, then I'm all in, or at least I'm willing to wade in and contribute. But if it doesn't feel safe, or I don't understand, or I'm not clear on it, I'm going to sit on the sidelines and wait, or perhaps even criticize. So let's start with this idea of 5D leadership. And the first D, when we think about it as leaders and role models, is this idea of defining, setting the direction. This is the time and place for us to go, here's what we are doing, here's what we're not doing. Here's defining the way. What does the future look like for us? What stays the same? So think of it like going on an expedition. What are the things we're going to continue to put in our pack that we have for years? So the things that aren't going to change, but what is new? What is next? And try and paint a picture in such a way that people can see it. It's like creating a visual map for people. Here's where we are. Here's ideally where we want to go. And here's what next looks like. Brene Brown, a thought leader in the space of connection and vulnerability and leadership, daring leadership, talks about this idea of how do we paint done? Using our words, how do we create a definition of what we're trying to do using metaphors, images, and language that allows people to go, he or she knows what they're talking about. They know where they're going, why they're going there, and the first leg of that journey and how I can get involved. And when we can paint and define things in a way that people can see it and it feels interesting, makes them curious, or makes them excited, you can bet people are going to follow. Because a leader without followers is nothing more than a dictator. And I think as role models, we want to start to build community of connection and a collaborative space for people to feel like they belong and they can contribute to continuing to define what better and what belonging in your sport can look like now and next. Our second D is this idea of desire. Again, this is about how do we lead from a heart place and not always a head place, or at least balance the two. What is it that's driving the need, the want for change? And how do we engage a group of people? Sean Aker, a Harvard professor who actually studies happiness as well as this idea of growing potential, and it talks about this idea that small potential is believing we can create great things alone. Big potential is recognizing that our success is dependent on creating a desire and a community of people who want to go along with us. He talks about creating a star system. I tend to call it the kind perspective crew. Who are the people I'm surrounding myself with who are loving critics and raving fans of not only the work I'm doing, but also they're going to have the courage to say what needs to be said, but also the curiosity to kind of go, what is this that you're trying to do? We want to be able to connect people to your sport, to themselves, and to your initiatives and what you're trying to do in your region from a place of, wow, I think it could work. I want to be part of it. And so they actually invite themselves in to your thinking, to your actions, to your initiatives, and to your community. Now, change is never easy. If we just look back at the last 2 years, what we know to be true is as human beings, we actually don't like change. We experience significant change, even the small things like change, like physical pain. It's not easy. It's not comfortable. I have to think about it. And our brains are actually kind of lazy. And so one of the things that also has to be part of our 5D leadership is this idea of determination, the grit to keep going, and the grace to allow ourselves to make mistakes and others to make mistakes and to wonder whether this is really worth it. Because change is stormy. What we're doing is we're changing usually not only what we're doing, but how we're doing it, and more importantly, who we are at the core. Real change happens externally and internally. And for many of us, we just want it to be handed to us quickly and easily in a box, and I can just make it happen. Often I say to people, I believe leadership is a high performance sport, and much like anybody in a sport space, there are times in our season of leadership where we need to be practicing hard, and we also need to be resting. And I think the determination for us to be better and do better requires a level of grit that says, I'm going to get through the tough stuff, even when every part of me is saying quit, or the noise around me is telling me this isn't going to work. As long as I'm staying curious and continuing to help people see the map that I defined in the beginning. Here's where we are. This is the rough patch, or the weather's just kind of crappy right now, but we're going to keep going. And here's how. And I believe we can do this. Continuing to build that community around us to help us kind of move through and show and report and communicate the progress is going to be critical. The fourth D for me is a place, dedication is a place where we have to start to take a look at. It's not just having a vision. It's not just having grit. This is where we have to start to skill up, new language, new practices, maybe some new processes. Maybe we start to automate. Maybe we go back to the basics. But the dedication required to play the long game of change means we have to start to put some systems in place that support the habits, the processes, and the practices that we're trying to elevate and improve. Better doesn't happen in our head. Better happens in the conversations, the connections, and the commitment to daily practice and daily staying, stepping forward. What am I doing now? What am I doing next? And being always able to help people see what the progress along the way. One of the simplest things in communication that I've seen that helps facilitate change in small groups or communities is helping people kind of almost see the map. Here's where we said we're going. Here's where we're starting. And then on a regular cadence and a regular time frame, we're saying, hey, here's the progress we're making. And even, the starting place of and the acknowledgements that I heard first thing tonight, when we appreciate the dedication that people are giving to trying to make things better, that actually is part of the fuel. It's funny, as adults, actually, as humans, we learn faster in more positive environments. And ironically, our brain looks more often towards what is wrong and what's not there yet. And so we tend to communicate through more of a negative lens. During times of change, we need to actually be celebrating the small wins and the champions and the pioneers that are leading our way, the ones who are out front, but also the ones who are supporting the initiatives and giving their time, their energy, and their heart to the changes that we're trying to create. Dedication is playing the long game. It's making it visible. It's making it fun. And it's showing progress, because that is actually what fuels hope. Taking time too along the way to actually have a party and just go, look what we've done. I don't know about you, but certainly, well, I am one of those people who has an aspiration to learn to curl. But I'll tell you, when I watch from the sidelines, I just feel like your community and your sport knows how to have fun. So I sort of feel like maybe you have a leg up on how you're going to actually build the dedication and the capacity in your places and spaces of change to sort of bring and fuel through fun, a willingness, a desire, and the capacity to keep going and to keep growing. The last D is discipline. And I choose this idea of refueling quite intentionally. If there's one thing I know to be true, leading change isn't for the faint of heart. And the other thing I know to be true is living through change is equally taxing. The last few years has shown us that many, many people are feeling burnt out. My favorite definition of burnout comes from psychologist Herbert Freudenberger. Just his name actually is fun to say. But one of the things that discipline requires is pause. It's taking stock and it's refueling, because burnout, if we give all the change to a few people, what we're going to start to see is those people that care too much for too long, they're emotionally exhausted. And then they start to actually feel depleted in terms of their empathy and their compassion for those who are struggling with the change or struggling to keep up with what's going on. And so we start to see cynicism and sarcasm in that space. And these are the people that we want out front energizing us. So we need to know that we're helping them refuel and find time to recharge. Because the other thing that can happen in times of significant change, and I think we're seeing this now as we look ahead, is people are like, oh, I just want to go back to what we used to do. So I'm hearing lots about, well, in 2019, we used to do it this way. Because in a world that wants things to feel normal, and we're only going to see things continuing to grow and evolve, we've got to start giving everyone, including ourselves, a sense that we're making an impact and we're making a difference. Because that also, when we start to feel that we can't make a difference, this is also when we burn out. So the discipline of fun, of rest, of refueling, of actually sometimes engaging others to take over for us so we can take a break and a holiday is a critically important part of our ability to build strong, sustainable club system, strong and sustainable sports system, and starting to really understand that we are better together. And that as leaders, the mindset we bring, the skills we build, the communities we create, we're building spaces that weather the ups and downs of the change, the mistakes, the setbacks, and the challenges, but also that community that allows us to celebrate together, to win together, to grow together, to have fun together, and to build your sport together in a way that brings in new members, new people, and continues kind of the legacy that I think curling has contributed to the Canadian community and what it means to be Canadian. And so this idea of 5D leadership for me is that place and space of leveling up our capacity, our courage, and the conversation that connects us by continuing to be clear, to be kind, to be candid, and to be curious. So I'm going to leave you with one question maybe, or one thought. as you look at your particular situation in your landscape, here's some questions I guess I'm going to leave you with is, what's working? What's not working? What does better look like? And what do I want to do to tackle that better? And who can help me? Because if there's one thing I know to be true is change doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's one person who says, I think better looks like this. And being brave and bold enough to share that story and that vision and that image with others to say, will you join me? So as you finish going through the business of your business of curling, I'm hoping you'll also take a moment after tonight to pause and say, how do I level up my leadership? And what does sort of 2.0 version of me, us, and where we're going next? What can it look like? So that's my message for all of you tonight. And certainly if people have questions, comments, or thoughts, if there's time, I'll leave it to Haley to let me know if there is time for questions. Otherwise, I'm just going to say thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for that thought-provoking presentation. We're all trying to navigate how we move forward coming out of the COVID pandemic. So thank you for your insights and your suggestions and your questions to get us thinking on how we best do that. Before we move on and before we let Judy go for the evening, does anybody have any questions for her before we let her go and enjoy the rest of her evening? Just check the chat. Going once, going twice. Everybody's thinking now.
Great.
So thank you again. We really appreciate you taking the time to come and speak with us this evening, and enjoy the rest of your summer.
Great. Likewise, you too. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Bye now.
Bye-bye now. Okay, moving on to the next part of our agenda is the adoption of minutes from the AGM from last year, June 21st, 2021. The minutes were circulated as part of your meeting package this evening, and hopefully you all had a chance to have a look at them. At this time, I'd like somebody to please move to accept the minutes of the AGM for last year as distributed.
So we have Ron Silver.
Thank you, Ron. And do we have a seconder?
And Karen Saramaki.
Thank you, Karen. And if we can put the poll on the screen, if you could vote in favor, not in favor, or abstain.
And we've got 19 votes.
Okay, and the majority are in favor.
Yep.
So that motion is carried. There was no business arising from the minutes of last year, so we'll move along to finances. And I'd like to call on Candace Phillips from BDO Dunwoody to present the auditor's report for the past year. Candace?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here tonight to go over the statements. I'm just going to pull them up here. And perfect. So hopefully everybody can see the statements. So we're going to start off with our independent practitioners review engagement report. This was just the report to go over the statements and goes over what our conclusion was at the end of our work here for this year's review of the financial statements as of April 30th, 2022. And we can see that it starts off saying just that we reviewed them for this past year and that just wrapped up. It also goes into management's responsibilities for the financial statements, which just goes and says that management's responsible for preparation and fair presentation of these financial statements in accordance with Canadian accounting standards for not-for-profit organizations. And of course, we've got 3 paragraphs to go over what our responsibility as a practitioner is. So it is our responsibility to express a conclusion on the accompanying financial statements. We have to make sure that our review is in accordance with generally accepted standards for review engagements, and that the procedures performed in the review are substantially less than and would vary in nature than compared to an audit. So this is not an audited set of statements, just a reviewed set of statements. And then getting into the end here, this is a little bit different from last year's statement, and that's just because of the introduction of the 50-50 draws and all that. So we have our basis for qualified conclusion. So this is just saying that because of fundraising revenue and lottery revenue, which is really common for not-for-profit organizations, we're not able to obtain satisfactory verification of the accounts for the completeness of this revenue. So we just have to put this sort of on here to say, because we cannot obtain the necessary evidence, we are just going to have to qualify the lottery revenue in that case. But at the same time, I'm also going to give the sort of side note here saying that we didn't come across anything that would make us think that there was any issues there, because that would have been brought up to the board ahead of this AGM. So there was nothing that did come to our attention in the review. However, we just had to put this very common sort of qualification on the conclusion. So it says that at the end here, we've got our qualified conclusion, which says, except for the possible effects of the matters described that we just went over with, that nothing has come to our attention that causes us to believe that financial statements are not materially misstated. So this is what everybody wants to see, is that there's no material misstatements, no adverse opinions or anything like that. So it was another good year for the association. So now to actually get into the numbers that we performed our review on, we always start off with the statement of financial position. And this is sort of that snapshot in time of April 30th, 2022. And there's also the comparative figures for the previous year as well, to sort of see how the amounts have changed year over year. So starting off with assets for the organization, we can see that at April 30th, there was cash of about 126,000 almost. So a little bit down from last year's 180,000, but that's mostly because the CEBA loan, that's the Canadian Emergency Business Account loan that was provided by the federal government, that was repaid. So that's what mostly impacted and caused the decrease of about 55,000. We can see that short-term investments, though, did increase significantly from last year. 100,000 more was allowed to be put into the GICs there. So there are 3 cashable GICs at year end that total to $265,573. Accounts receivable is back up again. These are just amounts mostly due from the various clubs for all the different amounts related to competitions and membership fees and the such. So that was $32,332. And last year we can see was significantly lower, and that's just because there wasn't really anything going on. This was actually the first season back since COVID where things were back to normal, as least close as we've seen it since, March 2020 there. So that's why we are seeing the accounts receivable going up, because everybody was sort of back up and running again. So that was the amounts due to the organization. On the government assistance receivable side, this is amounts due from the Canadian government for the wage subsidy. So that was just under $7,000 at $6,974, which is down a little bit from last year. And that's just because they did start tightening up sort of some of the requirements and the eligibility. And now those programs are all wrapped up now. So we won't see any of those amounts inflowing to the organization further. So we'll see this probably decrease down back to zero. And then inventory at year end. So this is amounts that make up for like the pins and some of the banners and the crests. So inventory total at year end, just over 7,300. So we had total current assets of $438,250. And then moving on to sort of the long-term sort of assets for the organization, there's long-term investment. That's just one of the GICs, a smaller one that's just over $10,000. And that is just one that is going to be maturing more than a year out. I believe that one matures in 2025 or so. And then the equipment. So this is just the little bits and pieces of stuff. There isn't any significant assets to the organization. There's no land or buildings or anything like that, but there is some ice equipment that was purchased back in 2016 that makes up most of the 4,400 balance there. And it also includes this year there was a computer purchased as well as a laser measuring device. So those were added. So that's why we see the balance went up a little bit there, but not too significantly there. So total assets for the association at April 30th were $453,005. And then moving on to the flip side, we've got the liabilities. So this is amount that are due from the organization to either vendors or to be spent on future projects. So starting that out, we have our regular sort of accounts payable and accrued liabilities, which again, just like the accounts receivable, we're seeing that it's gone up quite a bit from last year. So there was just over $43,000 in amounts due out. Part of this was due to Curling Canada, and there were some amounts due for marketing campaigns that were outstanding at year end. So what we would exactly expect to see, like, now that everything's sort of back up and running again, that the balances are going to go up. So it's nothing to be concerned about there per se. Everything was current. And then for the government remittances payable, this is just amounts due back to the government for some of the HST that has been claimed. That's about 12,000 there. And then there was some source deductions as well outstanding, which is super common at year end, of course. And then deferred revenue at year end was just 2,600, which is down from last year's. Last year's deferred revenue consisted of amounts for membership dues that were set aside to be sort of recognized in future years, which would be this year that it was recognized. And this balance here is the amount that was not spent of the funding received from the Ontario Trillium Foundation. This is some of their sort of COVID relief funding that they did have to help with rent and admin support costs. So that amount has been set aside and will be recognized in this upcoming fiscal year as it comes due. And then moving on to some of the other more long-term liabilities for the organization, there's deferred capital contributions, and this ties into the amounts from the Ontario Trillium Foundation that were paid back in 2016 to purchase some equipment and all of that. So this is just the remaining balance that needs to be recognized as revenue. So we capitalize the equipment that was purchased, and then we recognize it over the life of that asset. And then we do the same thing with the revenue. So we can see this balance is slowly just going to get drawn down, and over the next few years, it'll get down to about zero there. And the amount that I did mention earlier, that the CEBA or the Canadian Emergency Business Account was paid off, there was 40,000 outstanding at the end of last year. And we can see that there is a big zero there this year. So there is no more outstanding debt for that. That was paid back during the year as it was not needed. As we can see that, there was money to put into GICs and sufficient cash in the bank. So there was no reason to keep sort of a outstanding line of credit there from the government. So that was repaid. So total liabilities for the organization come to $63,183, which we'll see that that's a really good number to be able to compare that against our current assets of $438,250 up here. So that shows that there was more than enough assets to cover off the liabilities of the organization. If this was the flip side of it, it would be a different conversation that we would be having here tonight. But that is one of the things that we do kind of look at when we do review statements to make sure that, is this a healthy indicator? Is there any concerns for the organization? And there'd be nothing that we would need to raise at this time. And then sort of just wrapping up the statement of financial position here, we've got the net assets. So this is essentially all the accumulated surpluses and deficits, all the net income and all the revenue and expenses from the beginning of time and what's been accumulated. And it's just split into two pieces we can see here, those that are internally restricted into reserve funds. So that means it's just amounts that have been set aside saying, hey, if we have future projects coming up in the year end, we've got money set aside to be able to cover those projects or expenses coming up. We've got ones for different ones, different projects and competitions as well. And then there's the unrestricted net assets of 289,000. So overall, there's just under 400,000 of net assets for the organization. That just is a good amount to show that, you know, there has been, you know, surpluses accumulated and that it's not accumulated deficits or something like that. So that wraps up sort of the snapshot of everything for Noca at April 30th, 2022. And then of course, usually the piece that more people are usually interested in is the statement of operations and sort of seeing what sort of money was inflowing and sort of how it was spent during the year. So we can see that, of course, the statement of operations starts off with revenue. And this number is a great number to see again up here for competitions. There was revenue of $53,639, which is up significantly from last year's 2,600, and this amount is actually very much in line with the amount that we had for 2020 and previous years, which sometimes is about 55 to 65,000 a year. So this is just a, you know, a sign of things, you know, slowly getting back to normal. For that there. For Curling Canada partnership funding of 40,000. This is a new funding that came in this year, and this was just more about a work share, an employee share sort of setup between Noca and Curling Canada. So this is just sort of like a one-time funding. So this isn't something that you would expect to see regularly year after year. Deferred capital contributions, again, that just ties back to the Trillium equipment that was purchased back in 2016. And this is just recognizing that small little bit of revenue each year. There was a $667 recognized for 2022. Last year was $833. Another new source of revenue for the association was lottery revenue this year, and that brought in $14,362, which that was a great one there to be able to set up the 50-50 draws, bring in some extra revenue for the association and all the curling clubs. Membership dues is back up to normal levels. So that was 101,000, almost 102,000, which of course we saw that the fees were reduced in the prior year. So it's time, like it's now getting back to what we would expect to see. Miscellaneous income of about 17,000. And then getting into some of the grants from Ontario Curling Council, there was 33,000 in the operating grant, and a little bit more of COVID support this year, a little bit less than the year before, of course, just 3,600 this year coming in from Ontario Curling Council for that, but every little bit counts there as well. The Ontario Small Business Relief Grant, that was again some COVID-19 funding that was able to be applied for and was received. So that was $10,000 from the provincial government. And the Ontario Trillium Foundation did provide funding for 12 months. So part of that did start in September and goes all the way to this upcoming end of August. And that covers off some of the rent and admin costs to sort of ease sort of any of the burden as, you know, Noca sort of ramps back up to normal operations again. So overall, revenue has increased over last year, and the total revenue was $281,629 over last year's $110,000. So that's great to see that's getting back up to normal. I'm expecting we'll probably even see higher revenue, even closer to what we would have seen in 2019 and 2020, which would be over 300,000. Not far off from that at all at this point. And the one thing that we're going to go into before expenses here, the total expenses are the same from the copy that would have been sent out on Friday by Bobby, but there was a little bit more allocations done out. So those numbers are a little bit differently because we got the miscellaneous expenses better allocated amongst all the different line items here. But we can see that there were total expenses of $225,777 for the association. And most of that, of course, usually comes down to the biggest expense line for almost every organization I've seen is personnel, which is wages and benefits of about $93,000, almost $94,000. Competition costs came in at $39,308. The lottery profit share and the payouts came to almost $17,500, which is a bit more than the lottery revenue that came in, but there were some first-time costs with getting the software and all of that set up. Marketing, which we expected to be up to sort of get everybody back out curling again, came in just under 20,000. The association fees are back up to normal levels again, around 15,000. Professional fees came to about 8,500 for the year, which isn't that much higher than the year before, which was only 7,800. And then we've got some rent costs in there of about $5,093, a little bit of travel finally again, which is another sign of sort of things returning back to pre-COVID levels there. So that basically wraps up all the expenses. So overall for the year, before some of the sort of extraordinary items, the surplus for the year was $55,852. And then to add on top of that, sort of as a one-time amount, there was government assistance. So that would be the CEWS, or the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, as well as the Tourism and Hospitality Recovery Program. That brought in some additional cash flows of just under 19,000. And there was a disposal on some of the equipment. Some of the banners were disposed of. So that had a small, tiny loss of $108. So overall for the year, the surplus for Noca was $74,699, which is about 20,000 more than last year's surplus of about 52,000. So we can see that Noca is in a great position to be able to continue supporting all the curling clubs and, get ready for another great season. Hopefully there will be no sort of cogs in the wheel, and that it'll be another great year for you guys coming up here after you get to enjoy the summer off and before you guys get back into the cool rinks this fall here. So I just want to take a moment here to see if anybody has any questions for us on the statements. I'm not going to go into the rest of the statements because we could be here all night and we don't want to do that. I'm sure there's a lot more interesting topics that you guys are going to want to get into for the organization, but I'm more than willing, if anybody's ever got questions, you can get a hold of Haley or Bobby and they can send you to me, and then that way you can sort of talk about any questions you may have.
Okay, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. Laura, has anyone got their hand up to ask any questions?
No, I don't see any hands.
Okay, well, if anyone thinks of questions after the fact, like Candace said, you can always get a hold of me or Bobby and forward your questions through. And Candace would be more than happy to provide some additional information. So thank you, Candace.
Thank you.
Could we please have somebody make a motion to accept the draft financial statements for the year ending April 30th, 2022 as presented by Candace?
We have Ron Silver again.
Okay, thank you, Ron. And a seconder?
We have Christine Duboc.
Okay, thank you, Christine. And if we can put the poll up on the screen to indicate if you are in favor, not in favor, or abstaining from that motion.
We've got 23 votes. 20 in favor.
Okay, that motion is carried. We have another motion. Would somebody please care to make a motion that an accounting review for 2022-23 be conducted?
We have Karen Saramaki
Thank you, Karen. And a seconder, please.
and Jeremy Landry.
Thank you, Jeremy. And a poll should be popping up on your screen to vote on that motion.
And we have 18 votes in favor.
Okay, that motion is carried. And we have one more motion with respect to financial information. Could somebody please make a motion that BDO Dunwoody LLP Thunder Bay be named as the auditor for 2022-23 for the Northern Ontario Curling Association?
We have James McPherson.
Thank you, James. And a seconder?
Angela Johnson.
Thank you, Angela. And another poll should be popping up on your screen.
And once again, we've got 18 votes in favor.
Okay, that motion is carried. Thank you, everybody. We'll be moving on to board and staff reports. Reports were included as part of your package, so we'll just briefly have some remarks on each of them. I'll start with the president's report. So the majority of our clubs were open, even though we did experience a provincial shutdown for the month of January. Most of our regional and provincial playdowns took place other than the ones scheduled for January. And although some January events were able to be rescheduled for later in the season, a few competitions did have to be canceled as there was no opportunity to reschedule and still meet timelines already in place for the next level of competition. The past year marked our executive director's second year leading our association, and Bobby definitely embraced his role as executive director and has undertaken a number of new initiatives to improve communication with member clubs, provide support and direction to clubs recovering from COVID, and establish partnerships with Curling Canada, the Ontario Curling Council, and other member associations. We are pleased to welcome 2 new region directors and 1 new director at large to the Noca board. Region 5 will be represented by Abby Deshane. Region 2 will be represented by Rebecca Carr, and our new director at large is Trevor Bonneau. Many thanks to our outgoing Region 2 Director, Heather Houston, and our Director at Large, Mark Ministo, for their contributions to the Noca board. The Region 5 Director position became vacant partway through last season, and Abby Deshane has moved from her previous role as Chair of the Youth Advisory Committee to Noca Region 5 Director. This season, we also welcome Laura Frigette as our competitions coordinator. During this past season, Noca entered into a partnership with Curl On and the Ontario Curling Council to develop a 4-year strategic plan that includes common goals and outcomes for all 3 organizations. Representatives from each organization met over the course of the winter to establish an overarching mission and vision, as well as identifying strategic priorities. So once again, we're entering our new season with cautious optimism. We are hoping that all our clubs will be fully able to return to hosting events such as bonspiels and competitions. And to that end, our competitions committee has been working hard developing the 2022-23 event calendar. Region directors have also been reaching out to clubs for hosting opportunities. We remain committed to sharing information in a timely manner with our member clubs to ensure a safe and successful curling season in 2022-23. And in closing, I would like to thank our staff, board of directors, and member clubs for your continued commitment to the sport of curling. By working together, we will grow our sport and emerge stronger. And just as a little aside note, I hope we can get through the rest of this meeting without me having a a power outage because we are under a severe thunderstorm watch, and I can hear thunder outside my window right now. So fingers crossed, folks, that we can get through this without me disappearing off your screen. So moving along to the executive director's report, Laura, did you have something that Bobby put together?
I do. Is Bobby's face on your screen?
Yes, it is.
Okay, I will start the video. Bobby is buffering.
I see that.
Try going back a slide. See if this works. It's like he's actually joining us from Alberta tonight. That was a drum roll. We don't want a drum roll. Let's see.
Haley, I just signed on from Sioux Lookout, Joanne, and we were without power for 2 hours, so that's why I'm late.
Okay, thanks, Joanne.
Okay, yeah.
It cannot be with you live this evening, and so this message has been.
We've lost audio, Laura.
Okay, we'll try this one more time. It worked for the opening slide earlier.
Yes, it did.
Interesting. Okay, just hang on. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and reshare it and see if that.
It cannot be with you live this evening, and so this message has been recorded in advance. Subsequent to setting the date for our AGM.
Yes. For some reason, we've lost it again, so I can see him talking, but we can't hear him. So not sure what the issue is, but in any event, the executive director's report was included with the meeting package. So if folks would like to read through that, the message is going to be pretty similar to what Bobby was trying to say on his video that did not work. We'll move on to the competitions committee. Karen Saramaki.
Hi, everyone. As Haley said, you've all got a copy of the competition committee report, so I'm not going to go through this in detail. It was definitely more like a normal season than previous year. We were able to hold a lot more competitions. We had some great results at Canadians. In particular, Isabel Ladisser and her team won the U21 qualifier back in the fall and got to go to the World Championship in Sweden. And Tracy Larocque's team from Thunder Bay won the Canadian Curling Club Championship event. So that was fabulous. We had lots of other good results, but I'm not going to go through them all. Just a couple of things I'd like to just mention. Next year, hopefully, we will have a full competition season. So we will be very busy as there are a lot of events that are being planned. In addition to the regular ones, Ontario Winter Games were not held this year, so they're going to be hosted next year, as well as the Canada Winter Games. So there's going to be tons of youth events for the kids to take part in. So it's going to be a busy season. We're still looking for some host sites, so hopefully your region directors will be in touch with you and try to get the rest of those sites filled. Last season, we were supposed to host 5 national championships in Northern Ontario, but only got to do 2, the Canadian Seniors in Sault Ste. Marie and the Scotties in Thunder Bay, which were both very successful events, even though we didn't have too many spectators in Thunder Bay. This year, though, coming up, we will hopefully if nothing happens. Get to see Timmins finally host a U18 Canadian Championship in February, as well as Sudbury will be hosting the 2023 University College Sport Championship, followed by Canadian Mixed Doubles. So a lot of time and effort being done and volunteers needed to make these events successful. So we're looking forward to those. And in addition, North Bay is going to be hosting another Grand Slam, which is great to see. We're hopefully looking to update some of our officiating equipment. Our laptops are getting rather old that we have in all the regions across Northern Ontario. So we're looking to update that equipment, plus get some new tablets and so on and so forth. So we're working on that. I would like to thank the members of the competitions committee and the officiating committee for all their ideas and support whenever I had to send out emails in regards to questions and needed some ideas and so on, as well as the region directors for going after their clubs to try and get host sites. Also to Bobby Ray and to Laura Forget for all of their work in competitions as well. And last but not least, I do want to say congratulations to Team Jacobs on all of their success over the past years in representing Northern Ontario. They've done us proud at Canadian events, the Olympics, Olympic trials, Grand Slams, all sorts of events. So we wish all of those members all the luck in the future, and we hope to see them back again sometime representing Northern Ontario. So that's it for my report.
Thank you, Karen. We'll move on to the Youth Advisory Committee. Abby Deshane.
Hi, everyone. So to keep this short, the Youth Advisory Committee is a newer initiative taken on by Noca. Though it is great that our sport can be flexible to include all age demographics, it is a concern that the average age in our sport is increasing. This is where the Youth Advisory Committee comes in. There have been challenges to attract and retain the demographic in our sport. The Youth Advisory Committee focuses on addressing this concern through our firsthand insights as to what appeals to the U25 demographic. Our areas of focus are competitions, marketing, and schools and recreational curling. Throughout the season, strides were made in advocating for youth concerns and overall concerns for the sport on more public avenues, such as the Inside Curling podcast and a webinar put on by the Global Initiative for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusivity in November. The Youth Advisory Committee also met with various individuals and program coordinators to provide feedback on current youth opportunities and provide ideas about future opportunities that would be worth establishing. Moving forward, the Youth Advisory Committee is looking to build on what was started in this first season and derive action plans to put forth some ideas that were discussed in some of the meetings. Hopefully these can be implemented and have an impact on attracting and retaining the younger audience in our sport.
Thank you, Abby. And we are currently, we have expressions of interest out for new members for the Youth Advisory Committee for the coming year. So if any of the clubs that are with us tonight have some youth in their organizations that they think would be interested and willing to sit on the Youth Advisory Committee, please have them forward their names and a brief bio to me or to Bobby. And hopefully we can get year 2 of that committee up and running, because I think that it's really, really important to engage youth, but we need the youth to put their names forward so that we can continue with that committee. Last report that we have is from the Ontario Curling Council, Jen Ferris.
Great, thanks everybody. So this past season, I echo everybody's sentiments that it was a little bit more like normal, but it started slow with a lot of clubs putting their ice in late. And we obviously were interrupted mid-season with a mandatory closure. So unfortunately, that impacted some of the programs and services that we were able to deliver, as we deliver most of our stuff very early in the season. And the one competition that we look forward to hosting annually was Ontario Winter Games, and unfortunately the games themselves were postponed. So we did as much as we possibly could in the way of education for coach, ice tech, and officials training. But we have a full calendar for next season, and we know it's really, really important that we help build back capacity within the clubs, because we know we need all of these important volunteers to help our clubs thrive. So as Karen mentioned, the Ontario Winter Games qualifiers, the Force qualifiers ran, but the games themselves were postponed to 2023. And 2023 is looking to be the games program, I don't know, bonanza. It is a Canada Winter Games year, it is an Ontario Winter Games year, and it is a Parasport Winter Games year. So the Ontario Curling Council, because we only got one representative at those events, the Canada Winter Games, we're responsible for running that play down in conjunction with Noca, and we'll have a full games program. So just a thank you to all the host clubs, the officials, our learning facilitators, our ice tech trainers, everybody who puts their hands up to help us with our OCC programming. We're very, very appreciative. As well, I need to make special thank you to Heather Houston. As a representative sitting on the OCC's board of directors, as a Noca rep, she served the OCC for 6 years, and it was incredible the amount of work she did for us on a variety of committees, including our Quest for Gold, our high performance, our strategic planning committee. She was always there as a person to offer fantastic insight, and I know I will truly miss her, as will our board. So thanks to Heather for the great work you did on behalf of Noca at the OCC. A couple of highlights. I did circulate our report that was put together by Laura, so thanks to Laura for that. The OCC is pretty proud of some of the things that we got done this year, including implementation of our Safe Sport, our province-wide Safe Sport program, which will be expanding in the next season. But every youth, coach, and athlete participated in our Safe Sport program, and we're hanging our hat on prevention of abuse and maltreatment through education. So we want everybody who plays a role in our system, whether you're a volunteer or a coach or an official or a fan, we want everybody to hold a little responsibility to make sure that athletes are kept safe within our system. And we'll be, like I mentioned, expanding that in the coming season. If you haven't already, take a look in the mail. We were able to distribute the additional government funds that were allocated for COVID relief to all clubs. They were mailed a week ago last Saturday. We distributed $517,000 in a very short period of time from when the government gave it to us. I think that worked out to be about $570 per sheet of curling ice that your club should have received if you applied. So that's just a way for the ministry to say that they recognize the challenges that you all faced. As well, we were able to distribute an additional $47,000 direct to youth curlers. So the Quest for Gold funds that are normally given to about 10 individual athletes, we were given latitude with how we could distribute that this year. We, in conjunction with Noca and Curl On, made the decision that our youth curlers needed to have a little help just to make sure that they stay involved in the sport. So each curler received a small allotment. It was probably about the amount of the entry fees that they paid into play this year. But any youth curler who qualified for the U18 or U21 provincial championships in both Northern and Southern Ontario did receive payment. We were able to operate a successful Next Gen program. We're planning for the return of summer camps. Amethyst is a go in North Bay in a few weeks. Registration's still open. So if you have anybody who would like to have a fun week and remember that curling's all about fun, we still have room at that camp, including we have the ability to speak French. So if there's any French speaking athletes, we've expanded that. I think one of our greatest successes with Noca this year has been the joint hiring of Laura. She's been an awesome addition to both of our teams, and we're super excited to have her. Again, we'd like to offer congratulations to Team Ladisser and Team LaRock. The Northern Ontario teams continue to impress on the national and international stages. And I would really like to thank the Noca staff and board for their continued collaboration and I don't want to say cooperation because it's not that, it's totally collaboration. I think we're totally better together and creating efficiencies to help serve curling as a whole in Ontario. So that's my report.
Thank you very much, Jen. Much appreciated. Are there any questions for any of the people that presented reports before we move to accept them? If you either want to raise your hand or put a question in the chat, please feel free. I'll give you a minute or so to do that. Laura, does anyone have hands raised?
No hands, no.
Okay, if there aren't any questions, the reports are pretty comprehensive, but if you do read through them and you do have a question after you have a chance to digest the information, by all means, you reach out to me and I will forward your question to the appropriate person to answer. So having said that, would somebody care to entertain a motion to accept the reports of the boards of directors and staff for 2021-22 as presented and distributed?
We have Ron Silver.
Thank you, Ron. And a seconder?
I see somebody. Where are you? Jeremy Landry.
Thank you, Jeremy. And we'll put a poll on your screen to vote on that motion.
And we're at 21 votes in favor.
Okay, that motion is carried. We move on to acts of directors. Could somebody please make a motion to ratify the actions of the Noca Board of Directors for the 2021-22 fiscal year?
Hazel Baxter. Oh, she put her hand up and then put it back down.
Oh.
James McPherson.
James, thank you. And a seconder, please.
And we have Ron Silver with his hand up too.
Okay, thank you, Ron. And if we can put the poll up on the screen to vote on that motion. Okay, that motion is carried. New business, there isn't any. It would have had to be added to the agenda at the beginning of the agenda before we move to accept the agenda. So at this time, I'd like to thank those who have joined us through our live streaming feed. We will be ending the live stream portion of the meeting and we'll continue the remainder of the meeting with our club delegates and the Noca board.